Good morning, Higher Human. Today we're going to look at 1B and 1C of the Unit 2 Higher Human course, Production of Gametes. Firstly, we look at how ova are protected, matured and fertilised. So this was the female reproductive system we talked about last time. It had the vagina, it had the cervix, which was the opening to the uterus. We had the uterus, which was lined with the endometrium. Again, we talk more about the endometrium in the next key area. We had the ovary and we had the oviduct. In the ovaries, there's a lot of extra detail that we have in our notes that isn't covered by this part of the course. We point it out just so you can understand the context of what we will come on to later. But this slide actually contains all of the need to know information for this video. So inside the ovary are all the immature ovules that you will produce during your entire life. It contains many different immature ova, so ova being the plural of ovum. So a single egg is ovum, many eggs are ova. And it's in all the different stages of development. Some of them are completely immature, some of them are just ready to go through the important parts of the menstrual cycle. Each ova is surrounded by a follicle. Now, it's best to think of the egg as a central circle, like a nucleus, and then there's a big fluid-filled space, and then we've got the cell membrane. So the follicle would be that outside cell membrane that we can see in some of these pictures, and the ova itself is this circle in the middle. So we start off with basically just the ova with a tiny thin follicle around the outside, and as the follicle develops, it becomes more and more fluid filled until eventually we will talk about in another area, it bursts. The follicle is important for protecting the developing ovum, and it secretes the estrogen. So this membrane around the outside is what secretes the estrogen that develops the ovum. Very similar to when we talked about the male reproductive system last time, how the interstitial cells were producing testosterone that matured the sperm, the follicle produced the estrogen that matures the ovum. Mature ova are released into the oviduct where they can be fertilized by sperm in order to form the zygote. So again, the important thing for that is that we understand that the mature ova will leave the ovary and it will travel down the oviduct. Somewhere between getting into the oviduct and leaving the oviduct, that is where fertilization would occur. It's very, very uncommon for it to occur in another place, and it can cause quite a lot of issues if it does, such as ectopic pregnancies. This again is a little bit more information than we really need for this stage of the course, but it is required for your notes. So we have the immature ova surrounded by this line, the follicle, which protects it and secretes estrogen. It's starting to fill with fluid, starting to mature. What we call ovulation, when the follicle membrane breaks, fluid is released and so is the ovum. And then again, it's a key area 2 topic content. In stage 5, we see the follicle developing in something called the corpus luteum, and it then stops producing estrogen and begins to produce progesterone. It degenerates and then is eventually digested by enzymes. But up to that point, it's very, very useful. The need to knows for 1B and 1C are, in 1B, gamete production of the ovaries. The ovaries contain immature ova, so plural, in various stages of development. Each of those ova, which is one ovum, is surrounded by a follicle which protects the developing ovum and secretes hormones estrogen, as we'll learn about in the next key area. If fertilization is to occur, so after ovulation, the mature ova are released into the oviduct where they may be fertilized by a sperm to form a zygote. So again, there's a lot less in the need to knows than there is in the booklet. For the purposes of filling in your booklet, however, this is the image that it asks you to refer to. So we have the vagina, which is the entrance, we have the cervix, which is the entrance into the uterus, we have the endometrial lining, which again, key area 2 we talk a lot about, the muscular coat, which allows contraction. The uterus is this vessel altogether. We then have the oviduct, which you can see is this here, and these finger-like projections that come towards the ovary itself. In the next image, which it needs for the next activity, use figure 8.2 in page 125 of Torrance. This is the one it is talking about. and it's also the one that's in your booklet. So we have the immature follicle, which is bodied off. It develops. The egg is here, the follicular liquid, so this stuff between the egg and the follicular lining. We have ovulation. We have this thing, the corpus luteum, which again, don't worry about the corpus luteum really until the next key area. The rest of this PowerPoint would just be interesting pictures for your interest. So we've got a nice picture here of the follicle as it is immature and more developed. We can see here the follicle, and we can see the egg coming out in ovulation. Isn't that nice? If you want, you can demonstrate your understanding by looking at this and thinking, how would you label it? Sperm are described as motile. What does that mean? 2 conditions required for sperm to show motility. So what is it that allows them to be motile? Describe the role played by the seminal vesicles and prostate gland. Remember, in the course, we don't need to know them individually, it's just the overall function. Where is testosterone made? What's the difference between sperm and semen? So these would be answers: movement, energy, and so motility and viability. Seminal vesicle produces fructose, and prostate gland produces an enzyme for keeping the viscosity at optimum sperm mobility. Interstitial cells, and sperm is part of the semen along with the fluid produced by the prostate and vesicle. And then labeling the diagram, we would have the follicle, name the structures that surround an egg and an ovary. So that would be the follicle. What is this structure for, and what does it develop into? So it is protection, and it develops into the corpus luteum. Number 4, where does fertilisation take place? It takes place in the oviduct. Number 5, what hormone does the follicle release? It's estrogen, and then the corpus luteum produces progesterone. So we should know all these things. Hopefully that makes sense. If you've got any questions, please do ask.